Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for a really exciting conversation about what I think is on top of everybody's mind these days, and that is AI, and specifically how we help organizations move from experimentation and into production stage. My name is Elena Broderson. I am Senior Director of Strategic Alliances at Box, and today I am joined by two of the brightest minds of the industry, Mikeja Dudley and Nick Simha. So why don't the two of you go ahead and introduce yourselves, and then I'll dive right in.
Yeah, thank you, Elena. I'm Nick Simha. I manage our solution architecture team, which is the field technical team, working with software partners like Box to build solutions that we take together to our joint customers.
Hey everybody, my name's Mikeja Dudley. I lead our AI partnerships and ecosystem team, working very closely with wonderful partners like AWS on all things AI and content.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here. So AI is creating huge opportunities to automate work and uncover insights. But I think what we're learning is that for most organizations, the bottleneck isn't really the model. It's making sure that AI can safely work with the content that powers the enterprise. So today we are going to talk about how Box and AWS together build that trusted foundation so that our customers can move fast with AI without sacrificing security and control. So with that, I'd love to open today's conversation with a question that I think sets the stage for the broader discussion. And that's really why, despite all of the excitement surrounding AI, so many companies are still stuck in experimentation and unable to move into production. So Nick, why don't we start with you? Like, what do you think is really at the heart of this and why companies are struggling to make that shift?
Yeah, the first thing I'll start with to say is that the excitement is real. We have seen adoption across every vertical, every geo, and even in industries which way not typically move too fast with the new technology waves. And as you mentioned, the models are not the issue anymore. The models, both the open source and the frontier models, have become extremely capable in the last, I would say, 18, 24 months. So models are not the bottleneck. What we are seeing is three main things. One is, I would say, the content context gap, which is, 80% of your content, like purchase orders, invoices, etc., is unstructured data. And, enterprises are still figuring out how to govern it, how to manage it, and make it part of the AI workflow. That's, I would say, the top thing. I mean, think about it this way, right? You have a new hire. The model is like a new hire is brilliant, comes from the top schools, has all the right things. But unless they know your company's policies and how you operate, they're not going to be very effective. That's the gap between the content and the models. The second thing, I think there's a trust and governance gap today, because it's easy to build something there, but to get the green light from your CISO to actually push it into production, they need to really understand and have verifiable controls. And you need to be able to show that, not just tell, but show that these are the right controls are in place. And finally, I would say in the regulated industry, there is an additional twist where there's auditability, there's compliance, and to make sure that, again, you have the right controls and you can prove to the auditor that you're not exposing your company to any business risk. So what we have seen is the companies that have been successful really have addressed this comprehensively.
Okay, that makes sense. Mikeja, what do you have to offer there?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. I think we see those a lot, especially kind of the first one in the spaces that we work. Like all of this proprietary information is what makes AI useful for your business. And I think one thing I would add within that context is knowing those three things that people are struggling with. I think at times it is difficult for a business to choose where to start, to pick a specific area, a specific workflow, a specific team that is both high impact, but a space they feel comfortable experimenting in. Because I think sometimes we'll talk to our large enterprise customers and they say, oh, if we could revolutionize this workflow with AI, it would increase our productivity by 20%. It would change the business. But like you said, to make sure that you have all those things in place and have your CISO and everybody on board, generally you have to start with something small. And so I think balancing that impact with a place that's like open and ripe for testing and validation within the context of those three is challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. And in fact, we did a hackathon together,
Mm,
Box and AWS, and we had people come with different ideas, and we helped them really filter out what would make the most sense for their enterprise.
mm,
So I would say do some experimentation. And also, we have between the two of our companies, we have really good programs
mm,
to help you identify the right use cases as well.
mm, mm.
So, what I'm hearing is that this is not a model problem, but it's rather a context and trust problem. So, I'd love to scratch at that for just a minute. What does it take to actually earn the trust of the CISO? Is
Mm.
that a technology fix? Is it a process fix? Is it both? I'd love to hear from each of you on that.
You want to go? And
Sure, sure,
I
sure,
can add
sure.
on to that.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, there's a couple things that are necessary. As we mentioned before, like the models are becoming less the issue. Like a couple years ago, there were these questions around like, will my model like make sure to say do very technical things
Right.
like indemnify like IP infringement or these questions? And this has become much more available and more of a standard. I think what we see is one of the challenges is as agents become more autonomous and more powerful, one of the questions is, what can this AI tool or workflow access?
Mhm,
What can it produce? And where can it go?
mhm.
And I think that's a place that we've invested a lot. We just launched an agent governance product that helps with some of these things, but it's very similar to how you think about humans in our previous non-AI world, which was, hey, you only wanted to give certain people access to certain data, to certain files, and you only wanted certain people to be able to make that information public.
Hmm.
Like you're only letting your marketer write your blogs and things like that. And I think we're now entering a space where we have tools that could do that at a scale that no human could, and in a way of in an autonomous way with less oversight. So from our perspective, I think two things that are critical are what data, what files, what permissions does this agent or this AI tool have access to? And is that curated by people, by a controller that can make sure that's correct? And what permissions, what impact can this tool have in what it generates or what its outcomes are?
Yeah, that's spot on. And I would just add to that and say that you need to be able to have the CISO verify all of this,
Mm,
right? And so you have to say, like, when agent took a certain path, what path did it take?
mhm,
Can I observe it?
mhm.
And if there's a drift down the road, so like observability becomes a big part of that as well. So
Definitely.
yeah.
And I think like for our more technical friends, like one of the fun things, not to toot your own horn, but like products like Agent Core,
Yeah.
and they allow you to observe the agent
Mhm.
at the agent level.
Right.
And then on the data side, things like Box, where you have observability of what AI has done with a file, what has occurred, what has been
Yes.
generated. If you have these things together,
Mhm.
I think like you are able to better serve the needs of your company and of your security team.
Okay, so you answered the question. It's both process and technology.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes. It's
okay.
both.
So the gap between pilot and production is where this next question picks up. If we can agree that context and governance is the real bottleneck, the next natural question is, what does AI-ready content actually look like?
Mhm.
So the webinar title says, and I'll read from this, Secure Enterprise AI starts with governed content.
Mm.
Why is content readiness such a critical part of the AI conversation? Mike
Mm.
Agel, let's start with you on this one.
Sure. I think you teased it out in the beginning really well. Where basically like an LLM is brilliant at the internet, at the world, at generating things based on knowledge of us in general. But it doesn't have a work brain. It doesn't have like the business context of your enterprise. It doesn't have the like decades and decades of proprietary knowledge of processes of even like design standards.
Mhm.
And so context is existential to AI being deployable, being effective, being relatable, because that is what makes a business, an enterprise unique.
Mm-hmm.
And so to be able to have AI be effective for your work, you have to be able to give it the right context
Right.
in the right way, and in a way that's scalable. So like, I think it's not enough to think about a little harness that can take like a file or two, or like think about a database that can only munch on like a little bit of data. If you think about a large enterprise, you might have petabytes and petabytes of information that make your company what it is. And so that's why I think context and content and that baseline is an essential starting point for
Mhm.
whether or not AI is going to be effective in your business.
I love that work brain.
Mm.
Yeah, that's great. Nick, what about your point of view on this?
Yeah, I think it's very much aligned to that. Context is king.
Mm.
And like without what Mika said, that's that you have to have the one that is unique to your enterprise.
Hmm.
But also, when we see what customers are trying to do, right? They're trying to like build applications that improve productivity,
Mm.
automate workflows. And if you look at how organization operates today, it is structured, unstructured data coming together.
Hmm.
And then you got the experience that employees have built over time
Mm.
that makes a workflow work today, right? Whether purchase, whatever the sales, support, whatever else it is. So that's why unless you have that content there, you cannot automate it.
Mhm.
That's number one. Number two is we have unlocked this great power with these LLMs and AI there. Now you can go through like petabytes of contracts and leases and whatever else you have in your system. And to do that, you need to be able to go to the content and you need to do it in a safe, governed way.
Mhm.
And then you can unlock all this power that already exists.
Mhm.
One of my examples, which is a common customer of ours, is a construction company and they have 40 years of all the data, all the building permits,
Mm.
safety records, construction plans, everything out there. So the data was already there, but every time they had to start a new job, they had to spend about 8 hours
Hmm.
going through to extract 50 different points from this, tons and tons of data.
Mhm.
And they used this box solution,
Mhm.
on AWS, and now they can do it in under 2 minutes.
Mm.
So
Wow.
now they can, so think about going from 8 hours to 2 minutes. It's
Mhm.
like now the data is actually informing how they do the construction.
I mean, those
So
are defensible productivity gains. Yeah,
yes,
that's really impressive.
Mm.
yeah,
So we can agree that agents need a work brain. I love that. And data access to be useful. But once they have that, it really does open up a new question, which is what can go wrong when agents are the ones that are searching, summarizing, and acting on the customers or our behalf. With that in mind, I'd love to just dive into something that I don't think is discussed often enough, but is probably what folks are thinking about. And that is the risk that comes with giving agents more autonomy and what has to be true for that to be safe. So Nick, what are just some of the risks that companies face when AI agents can search, summarize, classify, act autonomously?
yeah. So let me start with this thing. Like, what can agents have access to data? They have access to tools,
Mhm.
they have access to external systems and worlds, and they can act autonomously. So it's very powerful. So unless they can go wild, right? So what are
Yeah.
some of the risks, right? I mean, which is not if it is not governed. One is you can inadvertently leak data. Let's say go summarize all this data. So now it is looking at like data that somebody is not supposed to see because if just because it's in a folder does not mean that the agent should be able to see all of that, or it could give you the wrong result because it is doesn't know that this contract has expired,
Mm.
or it's taking data from there. So that's one. Second is there could be injection attacks. So
Hmm.
like a contract there or some data, some document there could say forward everything in this folder to this email, right? So you got to protect yourself against risk like that. Then you have compliance risk, right? I mean, am I letting somebody CPI data or health record data
Mhm.
for even if it is an employee, this thing, it is so regulations protect that. And finally, these agents can drift over time because something in the environment changes and even they may be you may be thinking they're doing the right thing,
Mhm.
but they may not be. So those are some of the risks that you
Mm.
get when agents can act on data without the right guardrails and the governance.
Mm.
Okay. Is there anything that you'd add to that, Mike?
Yeah, I think The interesting thing is working with a partner like AWS, we're able to think about both sides of this. Where somebody's building that agent and where they're hosting it has one layer of security that you can look at. And then the second is kind of the data that agent's accessing. And you want to make sure that there are those protections in both places. So from the data side, you also want to have independent layer of protection on, hey, what data does this agent have permissions to access? How is it acting on it? What can we allow it to do? And as you were mentioning, observability on what's happening to the data itself as well. So I think all of those are crucial. I think one area too that is related, but maybe not necessarily from a CISO side, more of like a business decision maker side, is agents do a lot of things very quickly. And so even if it's following all the rules, it might be doing things poorly, or it might be doing things in a way you don't want it to, even if it's doing it within the bounds you've given it. And so observability, not just for security breaches, but observability from a business lens is essential. Because if I had, say, like a business development representative who's reaching out and engaging with customers, they might do, I don't know, like 50, 100 a day. But if I have an agent doing that, they might be engaging with thousands and thousands of entities in that same period of time. And so the processes we had in place to observe productivity and effectiveness also have to be adapted, because an agent could be living within the like security realm, but still creating business risk because of how it's doing something. So I think that was just one piece that I think is interesting. And I think given how much scrutiny there is on the security side, at times we forget about the other side of risk, which is like the business risk.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because I find too that we do tend to rotate really heavily toward the security risk as opposed to just thinking about the importance of observation at the business layer. So that's really important. Nick, you talked about agent drift alongside data leakage and prompt injection. And I imagine that agent drift may be a new term for some of the folks listening in today. So are you able to offer an example of what that looks like in practice?
Yeah, drift is like it's not malicious most of the time. It is like the agent's behavior changes either suddenly or over time. So it's like, think about, like you're trying to get to Denver, but you kind of start going towards Dallas.
I hope not.
But what happens is something changes in the environment, right? And maybe there's, like it is used to reading certain format, and that changes. The other reason it happens is, and this is where some of the governance also controls come in, is that agent has too much permission, so they end up in the wrong place. So like it's with your kids, right? So be within our town and don't go out of this. But if you tell them just come back at 7, they can drift.
Yes.
Right. So that is the drift, is that even though from the outside it's following all the rules, and I think Mikija touched on it as well, right? But in like it is doing everything correctly in some sense, that is not breaking the security protocols, but it's not giving you the business results you need over time. So that is the drift. So the behavior changes over time.
Okay. Yeah, that was really insightful. Thank you.
This is maybe a silly example, but I think another way that drift can occur is that models are just getting really smart. And so we were doing evaluations on a model, and we were going through and looking at the results because it was showing us errors that we didn't expect from a model at this level of intelligence. And there was one workflow where it had to extract the location of invoices and of receipts. And the workflow required that the location be a state. And we saw that the model was putting city and state, and that was breaking the workflow. And we were curious because we're like, there's nothing in any of these invoices that determines the city. And the model looked at the sales tax code and percentage on a given invoice and determined that it was San Francisco City. And so was adding to a workflow. And if anybody goes and builds workflows, you know that even if the information is accurate, additional data might mess with your flow. And so for me, that was a very like tiny way where you start to see this idea of non-malicious movement that ends up breaking like maybe a process that's doing all of your invoices, thousands of them at a time.
And also, yeah, that's a great example.
Mm.
And it's the model getting too smart,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
smarter than what you expected it to be. But other thing is, now you see that usually there's a lot of orchestration that happens as
Mm.
well. It's not just one model you call and get the response back. The model may actually call other models to do its work.
Mm.
So if you have some drift there, that can compound over time as
Mhm,
well.
mhm,
And
mhm.
that can happen slowly, or sometimes it can happen, suddenly as well.
So fascinating, really fascinating stuff. Thank you both. We were, I think, at this point, hoping to shift gears and talk a little bit about what it means to take theory and turn it into practice. And I know this will matter for folks listening in today.
Mm.
And to do that, I want to walk through how Box and AWS together combine content, governance, and infrastructure to help customers move beyond
Mm.
experimentation and into production. Mike Kejo, why don't we start with you? What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think when we think about like how we work together to bring things into production, I think it combines a lot of the conversation we had around security and compliance being built into the fabric of both of our solutions. So, for example, from a Box perspective, any piece of content, anything touches in your Box platform is permission first. So there is not a single API call, there is not a single action that doesn't first check whether or not this entity, this agent, this human should be able to access it.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of features over the last kind of several decades of working with files that we've layered on top of that. Things like detection of PII and being able to set policies. And so I think that really helps you enter the world of productivity. I think the second thing that we've done together, you teased at, was the pairing of unstructured data and structured data. So like people have worked with data in tables really effectively for a
Right.
very long time. S3, Redshift, like these are structured data repositories that have extracted value for businesses. And the beauty of AI is you can now do that from unstructured data. You can get usable information from the millions or billions of files you had in an instant in a way that wasn't possible before. And so, an example of kind of this becoming concrete, we had a large mutual customer who was really interested in taking all of their contracts, extracting the parts of data from those contracts that were important to them. And this is a company that has thousands and thousands of vendors, and pairing it with structured, dynamic, real time data in AWS to be able to make purchasing decisions, run analytics on top of it. And this was a really cool example because it was easily governable. It was something that would massively impact the speed and effectiveness of the business. And none of it would have been possible if you didn't have the ability to take structured data out of unstructured data with Box Extract.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't have been possible if you didn't have your structured data in a real time governed area with AWS. And so I think about that as kind of a key unlock for us.
Love that.
Yeah, I think I would just add to that to say that what the partnership allows the customers to do is to give them access to different models
Mm-mm-mm.
as well. So, the models are coming out at a fast and furious pace,
Mm.
and they can pick the model they want. Box comes with other things in the box, but they can pick their own models.
Mhm.
And the reason it is important is you don't want your data architecture, your application architecture, your security architecture to change when a new model comes up.
Mhm.
That's what Amazon Bedrock provides,
Mhm.
is that you can access any of these models without changing your architecture.
Mhm.
And then, as Amikeja pointed out, we work very closely together to make sure that our customers don't have to do all the really hard, undifferentiated work. Like, how do you keep your agent identity
Mm.
separate from the user identity? How is it? And as these identities propagate, as I said before, it's very common to have agents enlist other agents to get the work done. Then how does that go for each request out there? So we have done all that hard work so that now, if you're a builder or you're a knowledge worker, you can safely and securely access both structured and unstructured content.
And I think another example of this is with the applications that users are using on both sides. So you mentioned Bedrock and the models they provide. In Box, our customers can choose the models they want to power specific workloads, whether that's in the Box app or via API. And we support Opus models via Amazon. We support other AWS models as well. But I think another example of this is with the apps and the user-facing products that Amazon has. So for example, via the Box MCP server, in Amazon Quick, in Kiro, if you're building code off of a spec on a file in Box, if you're asking something from Quick to do with your knowledge work that needs to reference data that's in Box, we've integrated to make that really easy. So it's not just like the crazy complicated custom agents that people are building. It's also like if you're just a human being getting work done and you have information in Box and you're working in AWS, like that's also very possible. And so I've also really enjoyed that part of the work together.
I mean, these are just some great examples of the complementarity between Box and AWS. So really helpful to hear your perspective about the partnerships at a high level. I'd love to go a layer deeper, though, if we could. So Nick, why don't we start with you from the AWS side? How are customers thinking about AI services, and where does that fit into enterprise data?
Yeah, enterprise data is really key. I mean, as we talked about before, it's you cannot really build useful AI systems without accessing your enterprise data there. So, the way we treat that is like one is like access to the data, whether it's structured or unstructured through Box, and we have a lot of other things like data warehouses, databases, and other things to make it easily accessible in a safe and governed way. And then the other I would say is two key things that we provide in AWS is one is Bedrock, give you that model choice with the single API so that you can access any model without having to like write to the different nuances to that. And then other is called, so one is like model access to build, and the other was how do you deploy that at scale, which is where Agent Core comes in, where Agent Core addresses things like identity of an agent, like how do you keep the identity safe and outside of these, outside of like a prompt and things like that. How do you like secure it at the gateway itself? How does an agent access the different tools? So it's really like providing and the runtime environment, right? How do you have isolated runtime environment for each of the agents in a multi-tenant situation? So it's really providing everything for you to run at scale, and also provide like an in-depth security defense as well. So those two things together, along with enterprise data, helps really like a wide variety of builders to be successful with AI. And I would say one more final piece is really the partnership we have with software companies like Box, which is really critical because we provide, like building blocks for things, but customers have data everywhere, and they need, access to ERP systems and unstructured content in Box. So making sure that when customers go to AWS or Box, they can trust the solution, that the right integrations exist. It's easy for somebody to build, or a knowledge worker, like as Mikhail was saying, can access it easily as well. So that's where we see that like all of this coming together to build something useful.
Okay. And then Mikeja, from the Box side, how does Box help customers build the contextual foundation that's really needed for AI?
Yeah, I think we've talked a bit about this, but like at the end of the day, if you're trying to do something with AI, it needs context. And part of that context is unstructured, and part of it's going to be structured. And so I think the part that Box takes care of is giving the unstructured data as efficiently and effectively as possible to any place that you're working, whether it's a custom agent, whether it's a workflow. Our job is to make sure that all of your files are secured and managed, and that when AI wants to interact with it, it can do that in the most efficient and effective way possible. So for example, if you have 10,000 contracts, an agent really shouldn't ingest 10,000 contracts, flood a context window, and give you a somewhat jumbled, long-winded, hard-to-reach answer. What Box's job is, and what we do, is we say, hey, you want to get this information out of 10,000 contracts, we will serve you up the portion of information that is the most relevant for your workflow so that you can do your job well and you can do it quickly. But I think also, like, for people listening, Box is an ingredient in what you're trying to do, right? Like, you're going to have information in Salesforce, you're going to have information in Slack, in AWS. And I think the beauty of the AI services layer and a provider and a partner like AWS is, like, you have to bring that stuff
Right.
together. You can't assume that it'll manually do that. You have to, as a business, understand the context that's necessary, serve it up to the right place for that context to come together, and ensure that those data sources are doing their jobs. Our part of the job is the files and the content. And so that is the piece that we believe we're doing better than anybody else.
Yeah, what one of the things you said I think is really important, like that your content stays in place,
Yeah.
right? And you're surfacing the right content, because one of the anti-pattern we see sometimes is, just to make AI work, they'll take everything, all of this unstructured content, put it into a vector database, and have the agent work on it, which can expose you to a lot of risk, right? Keeping the content in place with the right permission there and, auditability and observability there is really key. I'll share one quick example. One of our common customers is a commerce platform, and they work with retailers and grocers, and they have, hundreds of them. And for them, the real content is invoices, supplier, purchase orders and compliance reports and all of this. And they have to make sure that they don't mix it up. Like supplier one versus, because some of the terms are confidential, so that you have to do it in a very safe way. So like keeping the content in place and having that, making sure that only the right thing gets surfaced for that in that particular workflow is really critical.
I'm really glad that you expanded on that. Really important point. And so you've each talked about your respective halves, I guess, of the foundation. So for Nick in AWS, it's scale and infrastructure, whereas Mikeja with Box, it's context and governance. And what really resonates with me about what you each said is the synergy, or maybe said differently, the codependency of the two, and that to be successful, you really cannot have one without the other. So I'm hoping that our audience is taking that away from today's conversation too. So with that, I'd love to close this webinar with a question or a topic that I think is probably really important to those that are listening as they are taking in this information, these awesome insights, and thinking about how to take it back to their organization. And so the question is, how do you balance moving fast without compromising control? So Nick, maybe I'll start with you here. How do you think organizations should balance innovation and control, especially with this need to move fast, while also recognizing that compliance teams and security teams need that confidence to be able to move fast with the business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would start by saying that sometimes people see this as a either or, and it is not, right? Because you can move fast and in a secure way. In fact, what we have seen with many of our customers that are ahead of others is that they actually use the right controls as a way to move faster. So think about in a highway, like you don't want to put like speed bumps along the way, but you want to put the guardrails, right? So you don't drive off the cliff. So what I would say is that as an enterprise, the first thing is to provide those guardrails, not the gates. Guardrails, not gates, right? So that your different businesses can move fast, they can experiment in a safe environment, and then you work with your CISO that those controls were in place, so you can green light things into production. And I think some of the integrations we have done already helps you do that, fast track it. There is this important concept that we, one of the things that AWS has always said is this shared responsibility model, right? So I think it's really important is that we as AWS provide some of the core infrastructure security for you. Box builds on it, but you as an enterprise also are responsible for security, and understanding where those boundaries are and making sure that you have the right controls. And then, as I again said, build a safe environment, build the guardrails, so then your business's group can move fast. And these become enablers for you to move faster, not slow you down, would be my advice on that.
I love the distinction between guardrails and gates.
Mm.
And I'm also really happy that you brought up this notion of shared responsibility. I think it's really important to keep that in mind. Mike Keja, a question for you is, what is one practical thing that you would want our audience to take away from today's conversation as they go and evaluate how to move forward within their organization?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about like how agents are incredible, but also like a little scary. And I think what I would say is like, don't forget to give yourself credit. Like, you as a business have done work for years, if not decades, if not centuries, to figure out how things should be, to curate what information is important. And so if you want to do something practical, pick a workflow where you know that set of information. Pick a workflow where you say like, hey, I have this documented way in which our customer service people should interact or should escalate. Or hey, like we have context around how our go-to-market teams should be building pitch decks, or how our people teams are helping support our employees. Like, you've done this work as a business for so long. Find a workflow, find a place where AI can make that existing defined context work for you faster. I love the example you gave earlier of the mutual customer, the construction company, where it has 8 years worth of data, or 40 years worth of data.
8 hours to 2 hours.
8 hours. 40 years worth of data that they know is the right information.
Right.
And they just have to sift through it every time they kick off a new project. Like, give yourself credit for those 40 years worth of data and use that as a place to test these AI workloads, because it's controlled, it's specific, it's defined, and you know the knowledge that you want to give to an AI tool, an LLM, or an agent. And you know that people are doing this work anyway, and they could do so much more work if that part of the day was that much faster. So I think for me, like when I talk to customers, to friends, to people in the industry about where to start or what you could do, it's those areas where you know you've done the work, you know you've identified it, and while you're working on that, you can clean up other areas where you think there might be impact, but it might not yet be ready in the way that these buckets or these experiments or these workflows are.
I love the simplicity or the practicality of the tip of just start with something where you know the context. I think that is really important. So any final thoughts from either of you?
Yeah, I think that's really great pragmatic advice. Other thing I would say that what we see is kind of moving a little bit outside the realm of technology is that, you know, like a lot of tasks is going to change. And leading your people through that, what the change means for them is also really important. In this, if you look at the tasks we were able to automate, are not things that people actually like to do anytime. Nobody wanted to go through 8 hours of 40-year-old contract to pick up this 50 data points, right? So telling them what else they can be doing is also really important. The people part of it is also important for you to help you move faster.
Anything from you, Mike Keja?
I think this has been exciting, and I think what I would encourage like anybody who's working with providers like us is like, we're all figuring it out, right?
Sure.
Like, jam with us.
New frontier.
Tell us the dream, and we can find a work back plan. And candidly, like teams like yours, of solution architects, of people that are doing this type of work with other customers, are a fantastic resource. And so I wouldn't assume that either of us has all of the context yet. But if we identify those use cases, if you reach out to the people that you're working with to build this, I think finding MVPs and pushing those out is something that we're all excited to do. Yeah, so I would just encourage people not to be shy.
Okay. All right. Well, on behalf of the three of us, thank you everybody for listening in today. We hope you took some practical knowledge and tips and tricks back to your organization. I cannot stress how excited I am about this partnership and the opportunity that combined AWS and Box offer to you, our customers. So thank you for being here.